So welcome to today's steering committee meeting. I'm very excited to have Matt with us today, who'll be sharing a bit of his knowledge around hybrid leadership, but a few housekeeping things that I just want to make you aware of and also get some feedback on while we have a few minutes at the beginning of the hour. Our conference, as mentioned just a few minutes ago, is coming up on November 18th through the 20th at the Drake Hotel in Chicago. So we hope to see many of you there, but as we are planning for that, you know that we're accepting abstracts for call for content on that, and that closes June 6th. But if you do need more time, we've heard that some folks haven't been getting the emails and they've been hitting firewalls. So if you need more time to submit those, we would love to allow for that that grace and that time. So if you need that, just shoot myself or Megan an email and we can make sure that we accommodate that as needed. But all of that information is on the website, priority content areas, all of that. The other item that we're looking to get a little bit of feedback on today is as we think through the actual planning of content and what things are happening on what days. We've historically had a lot of trouble keeping folks engaged on that Wednesday and what that looks like. We've historically had our steering committee meetings on that Monday morning and then have had content for all of Monday, all of Tuesday, and then somewhat on Wednesday morning. So looking at how we want to plan for this year and think through that, I wanted to propose some ideas and get some feedback from all of you, if that's okay. Questions before I throw out my options?
One point of clarification. So the conference starts Monday at noon. We have all day Tuesday. Tuesday night is the Gale Warden Leadership Excellence Dinner. And then Wednesday, we only have the space until noon. So it kind of starts on noon, full day, ends on noon. So just in terms of the parameters that we have to work within.
Thanks, Megan. Yeah. And as we're coming off of our strategic planning sessions and kind of gleaning information from that, we're proposing that we have some sort of CEO coffee chat a Wednesday morning, focusing on kind of the future of NCHL and sharing those exciting updates that we'll hopefully have ready to share by then. Other than that, moving into steering committee meeting and planning for the remaining 2 hours of that Wednesday morning. So like Megan said, we have up until noon on that Wednesday, looking at having that coffee chat from 8:30 to 9:30 in the morning, and then from 9:30 or 10 o'clock until noon, using that time for the Lens Steering Committee meeting, whether that be with all council members, council chairs, and steering committee. What that looks like can be thought through a bit further, but thoughts around moving that meeting from that Monday position to Wednesday. I know that might impact travel, that might impact some other budgetary things as well.
Diane, were you speaking?
No, I'm sorry. My
Oh, okay.
And I was telling her I can't speak. I'm on a call.
Okay.
But I obviously was caught and didn't
I do the same thing.
as
Go away.
quietly as I thought I was. But thank you for being so attentive.
Of course. So Jen's proposing, so one, it's either the steering committee, I know you all want to meet in person, so we try to hold space. So that could either be Monday still, like we've done for the past 3 years, or it could be Wednesday morning before you leave. And so that could mean you don't kind of have to come in and pay for an extra hotel Sunday night. You actually come in on Monday and you can get to the venue by the time conference starts at noon. But some of you may want to leave Wednesday morning, like we've seen, and therefore wouldn't want to stay until noon on that day. Or we can just fill it with content. We could have additional breakout sessions that day, but we really wanted to hold time for you to meet face to face with the new CEO, whoever they may be, in November as well.
Megan, it sounds like And Jen, it sounds like, as I hear it, I think your proposal would sustain people's energy and attention and presence into that Wednesday morning. I'm wondering if there may be another layer here. I love the CEO coffee chat idea, the steering committee time to be together in person idea. I wonder if there's one last piece that is something that is really generative and for people, right? Something that would be really, um, I don't know, something sort of like a highlight, right? So it doesn't necessarily feel like important core business aspects, strategically located, but also that there's a takeaway, there's a gift, and I don't mean specific like concrete gift, but the gift of receiving an amazing speaker or an amazing session that was really generative, and that people would leave on with a really energized final element on their palettes, their collective palettes.
Heather, are you speaking about the steering committee specifically, or people like broader, meaning like the whole conference people?
Yeah, either way. Either way.
One of the
How do you feel
reasons
about it?
that
Yeah.
I was just going to say, one of the reasons I asked Heather was, I think in years past, on that Wednesday, very often there was a closing keynote, and often if you look in the audience, it is sparse,
Yeah.
despite potentially trying to have that gift of, a infamous, certainly industry leading speaker potentially at that time. And so that's why I was asking, kind of what you were envisioning, or maybe just a
Patty,
little
thank you for that
different.
reminder, that it's something that hasn't necessarily demonstrated effectiveness as a way, as an magnetic element. Important to think about. I wonder if there's I don't know, having not attended, I don't have any context, so forgive me. There's just something about the pacing, right? that feels important. And if the general experience and consensus is that people feel full and well fed, they may not need anything further. What do you all think?
So I don't know if I could attend, which is why I've been quiet. So I don't want it to be misinterpreted as a disengagement. But I will say, in general, in these type of conferences, that last spot is really challenging. And I end up feeling, very bad for the speaker who's put so much work into their presentation and is able to compare the audience the first couple of days to when they're looking out into the people who are around them. So I do think that regardless of the level of any conference, the cognitive overload that people get of being away and being for 2 days, I think there does need to be attention to that last day and people's ability to stay engaged despite who that person is.
Yeah. I'm hoping the CEO of NCHL, the new CEO, wouldn't take anything personal.
Right.
Right. So that was kind of the goal there. We've also considered, workshops or boot camps of sorts that are intensives for that day. We could also do that on Monday as a pre-conference. And then those of you who want to stick around and go, have lunch with just the Lens group outside, no like external members, then we technically end conference after the CEO, introduction of the future of NCHL. And we close out, we actually end at 10 or whatever. We're also, in full transparency, balancing Gale Warden, right? We have an evening event that we really value people attending. And if we end conference on Tuesday at 4, who's to say who's going to stick around and want to stay and attend that event as well. So it's all a balance. And we're trying to figure out what meets your needs, and what you would find valuable, and not, waste your time in like, or the speakers for breakout sessions where there's only 10 people in the room, because that just feels bad too. So we want your feedback.
So quick question. So I know that for me, there's a what, so what, now what. So I feel as if what as to why we're there is pretty well established. The so what of learning the next best practice, seeing how we come together. The now what, I think the richness is in being able to connect across organizations intentionally, perhaps around pieces of work that we're engaging in, want other insights or something like that. So I wonder, is there a community collaborative connecting point that can be hour, 90 minutes, I don't know what it is, but something around that, because I think there's a way to land the plane, if you will, in terms of applying everything that we've learned and now integrating it and coming up at least with one step we're going to have moving forward. I don't know what that looks like, but something along those lines. What are your thoughts?
So Jen and I talked about, there's always that idea of wanting to pull, now that you've heard everything from conference, you've had a year as part of these councils, how do we look to the future? To your point, Tim, how do we plan for a very invested 2025? And we could essentially use that time for the Lens community, coming off of a chat with the CEO, to then plan for what is a high impact 2025 look like within the Lens community. Kind of how do we prioritize what the councils talk about? Do we need a new council? Do we need to kind of dissolve a council based off of trends, things like that? We could use that time for a really strong working so what meeting to make sure that your membership and your involvement in Lens in 2025 is valuable. But that's if enough people stick around. Otherwise, it's like,
Megan, just from
Yes.
a timing perspective, the conference is like mid-November.
Mhm.
And so it's a serious question, meaning like, is that enough time, for us to have a discussion about not the so what,
Yeah.
but meaning like from a Lens perspective, a now what in 25, does that really give NCHL enough time if they needed to shift or if they needed to pivot to do so by the time 25 kicks off, even if it was mid or
Yeah.
late January?
I think so. I like to make changes quickly. I think we could have enough of the structure and the bones, like the skeleton of Lens ahead of conference. And then, we could have that time to build it out more sufficiently, because we're going to have to be able to pivot coming off of a strategic planning session, and we're going to need to have member input. I think we would have to be nimble. And if we can't, then I don't want to say that. I think we could. But Matt, I just want to acknowledge you. Thank you for staying with us and being a
Sure.
part, like hanging out while we have this important conversation. We only meet with this group like every other month. So, but yeah, Patty, I do think we would be able to pivot if we needed to. As long as you are all open to that as, members as well, knowing that things could change a little bit, not drastically. But Jen, I kind of took over. You are the senior manager here in this realm. I'm sorry for doing that.
No, and you have, all the conference knowledge, so it's helpful to balance that. Any other thoughts? And if you have thoughts post call, an email away, so we can always take that feedback. If you think of things, like we said before, budgetary restrictions, travel restrictions, things that would, sway one way or another if Monday or Wednesday works better. We're also asking the same questions of our planning committee. and the NPF group. So all of the early careerist folks that will be hopefully joining us at conference as well. So. And Tim, I just want to recognize your question. I think that's a great, posing those so what's all of that to attendees, even post-conference, I think would be a good way to evaluate and move forward too. So I appreciate that framework. I want to hand things off to Matt, and make sure that he gets all the time that he needs. Excited to have him talk a little bit about hybrid leadership, but I'll let him introduce himself and go from there. Thanks.
Sure. Thanks, Jen. I'll just share my screen as well, if that's okay with everybody. I just want to double check that you can see the slides rather than the presenter view, or have you got the presenter view?
We got the presenter view of the slide.
Okay, how about that?
There we go. Perfect.
Very good. Okay. Okay, well, thank you for having me, everyone. And I'll try and keep this as relatively tight. There's opportunities to talk a bit more as you wish, but I can get the key messages over, I think, in a relatively short period, and maybe make sure you don't overrun on the agenda. A couple of things just to say about my organization and us. So we are, in essence, a leadership practice. We're a consultancy, quite boutique. We work with clients around the world, but we're not a massive scaled business. Our most significant clients operate in probably 20 or 30 markets around the world. And we sort of do three things. We work with senior teams on their own skills and leadership capacity. The bulk of our work is with mid-managers, functional managers on developing their leadership skills and running leadership development programs for that group. And then we also do ad hoc leadership type facilitation and workshops around particular topic areas. So that's a sort of broad area of what we do. The focus of the business is very much around this idea that to be effective as a leader, you've really got to understand yourself. You've got to understand your own perspectives, your own preferences, your own priorities, and you've got to be able to understand how other people can see things differently to that and have different perspectives, different priorities, different styles, and how you're going to bridge that potential gap. How are you going to bridge that so that you can better influence, better motivate, better inspire people? That's the fundamental building block of everything that we do, pretty much. And on top of that, then we'll layer day-to-day skills like delegating skills or feedback skills or whatever it might be. And on top of that, we'll layer business activities like negotiation or leading change, or those bigger business stuff. That's what we do. I've been running the business for the last 6 or 7 years. My background was in corporate life. I was a divisional MD for one of the big global marketing networks before I decided that being a leader was all very hard, and I went off to do consulting work. The thing I would say is that we got involved in the hybrid stuff primarily as a function of client demand. So back in the pandemic, when we were unable to run workshops and programs face to face, clients said, well, we need to start doing some of this stuff remote. We still need to do this stuff. And we had to think really hard about how we started creating programs that would work in a remote way. And bottom line is that we did that to the extent that the feedback we were getting from delegates who were attending remote programs were at the same very high level, sort of net promoter scores of 9.3, 9.4 out of 10 for both the remote work and the as per our face-to-face work. So we managed to find a way of getting that to work pretty well in that period. And then that got clients talking to us about, well, how should we start thinking about this stuff? What do you think about it and everything else? So that's our background in this. just let me, we've looked at introductions. I'm basically just going to provide an overview of some of the key things that we've seen, some of the research that we've been looking at, some of the commentary. I'll then create an opportunity for everyone in the group just to share some of your own reflections on that and look at concerns, look at things that you're particularly interested in. And then I'll make some sort of outline recommendations for things you can think about in your own leadership practice, your own work as leaders, but not from a point of view of saying this is what you should do, from a point of view of saying this is the sort of stuff that tends to be working for others. These are things to think about, because I am not one for generalizations. I do not believe that everything works in every context. I think people have to make decisions about what works for them, and then maybe that you can do a little bit of work on some action planning. Is that just raise hands or something if anyone's got any concerns or questions, but I will try and guide you through this. I wondered if I could get a little bit of input from the group before I go any further, which is to ask this question, and it might be best just to put the answer in chat, although I'll then have to find my way back to the chat screen. I'm sure I can find a way of doing that. So here's the question in terms of, in your organization, the organization that you're part of, how would you characterize the policy in relation to hybrid working? Is it something that's, is it we've got really clear guidelines, it's all written down, everyone knows exactly what's required, what's demanded, and it's all pretty rigid? Is it more well, we've got some general guidelines, we've got a general approach to it, but actually there's quite a bit of latitude and people can make personal choices and that sort of stuff? Or is it that it's a bit of the Wild West, right? People can do what they're meant to be doing. And then the second thing, we'll come to the second question in a minute. So if we could just look in chat at that question, it'd be really interesting to get a point of view on how people are feeling about that. So we got B's, 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 and an A. And that tends to be quite typical of what we see, a lot of B, a lot of organizations who are trying to give some guidance, but are not creating strict policies at this time about this stuff. So that's interesting. And then the other interesting input would be to ask, if you think personally about the time you spend thinking about hybrid leadership and working practices in a hybrid environment, what's one significant concern that you keep wrestling with? What's one thing that stays on your mind about the challenges of hybrid working? And I don't mind people shouting that out or just giving us a view. Or our A is B, Tim. I'm not quite sure what that means, but I like it. So, employee engagement, team connection. Okay, cool. It's that collaboration stuff, that engagement stuff. Equity. Yeah, great. Okay, Heather. Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about that. Parity. I guess is that probably, Megan, I could put that under the equity thing as well.
Yep.
Okay, so we've got a few things. Yeah, that's right. Okay. Okay, let me just close that window down. Okay, so let me just share what I would see as the key things that I've seen in the research. We have spent a lot of time looking at what commentators are talking about, be that academic institutions, be that management consultancy practices, other commentators. And I did, in anticipation of this call, I actually went back and had a refresh look at what's being said. And I have to say, it hasn't moved on much in the last 3 or 4 months since I last looked at this. But let's have a look at a way of thinking about it and a way of thinking about the issue that I find particularly helpful. So if we think pre-pandemic, there's a norm, and I'm talking here, by the way, just so we're clear, the focus I've got here is on knowledge-based workers. I'm not looking at I'm looking at people who pre-pandemic were pretty much office based, right? That was the way it was. Most days we were mostly in the office. I'm not looking at factory workers and their particular issues, or sales teams. There are different dynamics going on. So that's the area that I'm thinking about. And that does, by the way, raise questions around equity when you come to organizations that have some of this and other people who have to be on site because they're in a clinical environment or whatever it might be. But that's the norm there on the right. And what the pandemic did, of course, was say, well, actually, it's not office-centered anymore. Suddenly, it has to be home-centered. Now, there's an interesting thing going on here, because I'm going to argue that the office-centered world is really the norm. It's the familiarity, it's the comfort zone of most managers. Okay, in fact, nearly all managers, because it allows me to practice my style of management, whatever it may be. If I'm the sort of manager who tends to be quite, hands off, maybe I'm good at giving direction, I'm good at giving objectives, but I'm pretty comfortable with people making their own decisions about how they do stuff, coming up with their own solutions, giving them autonomy in that sort of way, then that's okay, because office working works for that. But importantly, it also works for managers who are more hands-on in their style, who are more prescriptive in their style, and are more about getting into the micromanagement, and really only feel comfortable when they can see what everybody's doing, and they can observe that, and they can get on top of it, and they can be actively involved in the work of every person in their team. So whichever style you fit in, and any part in between, that sort of we're in the office thing allows you to work with that. And that's why it's very comfortable for management, is I think very clear in the research. The home-based thing plays to a whole different set of comforts, and it plays to a natural comfort for us as human beings. And it plays to the idea that familiarity and that safety is something that we get more of from home than we do from the office environment. So I am more comfortable. I feel more relaxed. I feel more unthreatened. I feel more able to be myself almost in an environment that I'm very comfortable with. I'm sitting talking to you right now in my office at home, surrounded by the things that make me happy, that make me feel familiar with my environment. And the office environment cannot match that. And as humans, and we know this, we've all very familiar with, let's say Maslow, these are fundamental needs that we have. We need those physiological needs. We need that safety and security. We need that sense of belonging, that more comes at us from home. So it's natural that when we move into that, we're working from home, there's almost a collective excitement that comes from a lot of people, because it is more familiar to them and it's more comforting to them. And I'm going to argue that that's simply some basic human nature that we have to recognize as a reality for more people. I'm not arguing that it's universally true, because there are some people who don't need that, and I'm not arguing that it doesn't change by different. There are different factors within there. But as a generalization, which I've just said I don't want to do, it's typically true that that's what people are looking for. And I think it's really important as leaders that we recognize some aspect of truth in that. And that's where, of course, the tension comes from. It comes from this idea that now we're in the post-pandemic world. There's a lot of people in leadership and management positions, particularly, by the way, and not exclusively, particularly those that come from that more, view of the world that says, I need to see exactly what's going on. I need to be in control to get everyone back into the office, right? There's that pull, and there's the reticence that's coming from a lot of people who are saying, well, hold on, I can do a really good job at home, and I'm more comfortable with that. And by the way, another factor, it's typically more convenient for me. No longer am I having to get into the car for an hour or whatever it might be and fight my way through traffic. What way is that for me to live my life? Fighting through traffic for 2 hours a day. That doesn't sound like a good idea if I've got options not to do that. So this tension is right at a fundamental level of this. And I think this idea of characterizing it in familiarity is helpful. As managers, we are familiar with our ways of managing that were built from our time as people managing office-based workforces. And as people, we want to get into our nests. We want to get into our castles, as we say in England. Our home is our castle. And that's what is something that we're psychologically after and psychologically fighting for. We're sort of wired for it. So I think this whole issue is interesting, and I think as managers we've got to try and separate ourselves from an intuitive view of what we think's right to do to an objective perspective that helps us bring these two things together. What are the real risks that we're worried about as managers? How do we know that whether these risks are real or not? How can we manage those risks? How can we even eliminate them? And how can we provide workers with more of the familiarity and convenience that they really crave? It's an objective question. How do we get the performance the organization needs and meet this psychological pull that's coming from people? And by the way, just as an interesting characterization of this thing, it often strikes me now as I do go to clients' offices that I still see lots of pictures of people at their desks in the office of the kids, the cat, the dog, the ski holiday, all that sort of stuff. I'll tell you one thing right now. In my office here, there are no pictures of me in my former office environment, right? I don't have pictures of me sitting at a desk in a 40-story high building, looking. That is not what I'm surrounding myself with. I just leave you that as a little teasing thought about, maybe there's some reality of this stuff. So I think all that's really a fundamental piece. And I think some organizations have got to grips with that. And I'll give you just one example, which is Deloitte, the management consultancy. So, and you can check this out on their website. They're quite open about a lot of this stuff. They've got videos on it and all the rest of it. But they've got something called Deloitte Works. And Deloitte Works is their future of work, hybrid working initiative. And they started from a place of, we are going to ask the workforce, how do we get this to work? How do we get this to work? And those questions of equity get surfaced, and those questions of, we are a business and we've got challenging goals to achieve get surfaced, as well as, sort of, what would you prefer? So there is a context that's given. And there's a really nice line here, trusting our people to make the right choices on when, where, and how they work, whether it's at the client site, the Deloitte office, or at home. And that they're being asked to make those choices in the context of knowing what needs to be done, knowing what our goals are, knowing what we're trying to achieve. And that if you're listening to them talk about this, they will say that that's sort of what locked their ability to, as they believe right now, to have this right, in that they started from that place rather than starting from management prescriptively determining what needs, this is what's going to happen, which we'll talk about again in a few minutes. And I think this plays to, some of you will be familiar with the famous theory X, theory Y management stuff from McGregor, which is this idea that, theory X says that all the workers are out to do as little as they can for as much money as they can. None of them are interested. It's only by standing over them as managers that we get performance out of them. And theory Y that says workers are inherently interested in doing a good job. They like being seen to be successful. They like reward. They like, they like the feedback that comes from doing things well. The Theory Y model that says that managers should be facilitating people to be able to do things well because that's what they want to do. And of course, the truth being, and as McGregor would say, and the real world is a hybrid nature of those two things. But where can you provide trust? Where can you build on trust, as opposed to just thinking that there's risk and just thinking that people are out to get from the organization what they can get rather than help the organization and themselves be successful. So there's a whole load of thing in there. And as I say, I would just hold up Deloitte as one example that you could look at where they've really taken a bottom-up approach to working out how the organization can achieve its goals and remain attractive to the workforce. Just a quick pause on that bit of context. Does anyone want to raise any particular questions about that?
Matt, I have a quick question. You may know or the answer to or not, doesn't matter. Maybe it's more of a comment. Deloitte also has an increasingly well-known, well-respected chief wellness officer, Jen Fisher. And I'm curious if, given Jen's work in the organization and how fully and respectfully they've embraced this framing for hybrid work, if they have metrics demonstrating higher rates of well-being at work.
I don't know that they have the metrics, but you're absolutely right to say that has been right at the heart of their thing. I've got a slide on the wellness piece coming up. It is a critical part of this. And actually, let's just talk about it very quickly right now. But so there are some challenges in there, of course. That there is the fact that there are some some mental health benefits coming from less stress that can be associated with the daily commute, right? There's inherently some potential benefits there. At the same time as there being challenges around people who have real issues with isolation and with loneliness and feeling that they're not supported, which we'll talk about. So there is a genuine I think appropriate focus on making sure that we've put in place the things we need to put in place to support people's mental health and make sure that is not a consequence of a hybrid working policy that's been developed without that in mind. Does that make sense? Oh, okay. I'm just going to very quickly now look at something around pros and cons, and I will skip over this quickly because I just want to get on to the next thing. So if I look at all the research I've looked at and look at the meta-analysis of that, I would come up with these generalizations, right? One is that the plus side tends to be this idea of employee satisfaction, particularly in the context of, if you give me convenience and flexibility, then I feel better about my workplace, right? If I am able to do the school run every now and again, if I am able to, because I'm at home, I can also get at stuff that I can't get at if I'm having to travel into the office. That makes me feel better about stuff. And that can lead to better retention rates. And there is some research coming through that people are more like, say, very clearly more likely to leave an organization that has poor hybrid working policies than has effective hybrid working policies. Almost self-evidently, you can get better access to talent. If you're prepared to give flexibility to people about how and when they work, that opens up jobs for people who may otherwise not have been, one, able to, two, motivated to do something that's 5 days a week in an office an hour away. There is for the financial directors amongst us, there's that opportunity to reduce cost, because we see a lot of our clients now reducing their amount of floor space because of the flexibility they're bringing into work. It allows you to quickly scale into new markets because you're not having to put so much physical presence there. And there's a really interesting thing about strong networks becoming stronger. So the people that I rely on, the people that I interface with a lot, I am now even closer to. We engage a lot, we talk a lot, we get stuff done together. I'll come on to the flip side of that here, which is this stuff. So challenges around corporate culture, particularly an idea called connectedness that came out of Gartner, I think, or Korn Ferry, one of the other. I could check the research, but I really liked it. It's this idea that it's not just about compliance with corporate culture. It's about really feeling connected to corporate culture and really feeling that it's meaningful. And it clearly, if you've got a lot of people working at home a lot of the time, that's something that is at risk. New and young workers, how do you onboard those? Real issues around making people feeling part of something and giving them a sense of belonging when they're new and as I say, especially young. Cross-functional collaboration, which links to the bottom bullet point here. Are weak networks becoming weaker? Because we're more focused on our stronger networks, what people are saying they're seeing is those weaker networks, those more tangential networks, becoming less powerful. And I think that's a really interesting thing. And then this final thing, which is the point we made a minute ago about managers, is this emergence of helicopter bosses who are trying to stay closely engaged with everything you're doing, whether you're at home, in the office, or somewhere else. So forcing their way into your working day in order to helicopter over everything that you're doing. And the absentee bosses, the ones who are at the other side of that coin, who actually are not involved at all. Because you are out of sight, you are out of mind. And therefore, that's a challenge that people are seeing. And of course, in the middle of that sits the question mark over performance and productivity, which is the acid thing, I think, that most people are really concerned about. But what we hear most is, how do I know how do I know that we're doing a good job? How do I know that we're getting things done? And we can come to that. We can come to that in a minute. But that's the thing I find most people, when they really talk about it a lot, sort of, if you like, admitting that is their primary concern. I'm going to look at this. I'm just trying to keep half an eye on time. So we've done something I'm going to share with you all, which is we've done a sort of self-auditing questionnaire that's got 41 potential interventions in it for managers to think about when it comes to their own approach to hybrid working and maximizing the impact for their organization and for their teams. And they broadly fall into these categories of communication, which is what it says, but probably highlighted consistently as the thing that managers think they're doing well, and their team saying they don't do well when it comes to hybrid working. So typically simply not communicating enough, and being a little bit more on the absent side. So secondly, this sense of belonging. There's a whole category of stuff around how do you create a sense of belonging in a hybrid world? Making decisions about when is face-to-face the right thing to do and when is remote the right thing to do, and how you make that attractive. It's almost like, to use a bit of marketing phraseology, it's almost like creating a value proposition. What's the value proposition for getting people to want to come into the office when their nature might be, if I can, I'm going to do it at home. As we just talked about, fostering mental health and well-being for remote workers. Meeting and collaboration. How do we create really effective meetings, particularly in things like Zoom, right? In online environments. Measuring the impact. So what are we measuring in the hybrid world? How do we know that performance is still happening? How do we know that we're getting better at stuff? And then the cultural piece is that how do we create this sense of connectedness to the culture in a hybrid working environment? Now, I've got some prompts. Jen, I think I previously shared a version of this deck, but I'll reshare it after the meeting so that you can circulate it for people to look at. But I'm just going to share the first slide of prompts, which is around the idea of communication, and the sort of associated question I'm going to ask with this is around, if you look at this this now, I wonder what it stimulates in any of the group we've got on this call in terms of what they're doing currently, or what might be a useful idea for them to think about in their own team. So here's some stuff that, again, we've taken from the research, both from the literature, but also with our clients. So this first one I think is really interesting. It's managers and individual team members co-creating, important, right? Not managers telling, co-creating and managing personalized contact plans for the team, for each team member. So that's regular one-to-one time. When I'm talking to Fred, who is one of my team, my personalized one-to-one contact time with him is going to have a certain outlook. It's going to be one set of things. The one that I have with Sally, who's somebody else in the team, may be different. And that's going to be a function of what level of interaction do they need? Do they think they need? Do I think they need? What proximity do I need to their workflows? If I think about them in a skill and will way, then how much of the skill and how much of the will do they have to do their role, which will have an influence on my personal connection plan with them. But I'm creating individual connection plans with each team member that become really important to my working week. So again, the next one, a really important thing, managers role modeling this idea of communicating and the importance, and having another simple thing, having contact channels on against, in the way that you agree you should have them on. If as the manager, I'm seen as being unavailable when I'm working from home, no one can get hold of me. That is modeling a behavior. So as managers, we have to think about what behavior are we modeling and creating norms out of. This idea of intentional ad hoc communication is really interesting. And again, it's something I've seen quite a lot about, which is the idea that you've got to replace the unintentional, the accidental ad hoc conversations, which of course, no one's suggesting that you can absolutely replace them, but you can be intentional about thinking about how you could do something to create them. So we've seen several examples. We've seen clients building into team meetings a 5-minute bit of interaction before or at the end of the meeting. So the team is getting some sort of social interaction as part of the meeting environment, something that they're doing. We're seeing managers intentionally contacting people for a chat about something, beyond the need. There's no need to have this chat, but I'm creating that ad hocness, if you like, intentionally. So that's something that we're seeing. And I love the idea of a team level charter, the idea of co-creating with the team a charter for how we are going to behave together. What are we as a team going to do to support each other and to be effective as a team in this hybrid world? And by the way, one of the key things that's coming out and you'll see it on one of the other slides as you look at these, is this idea that everything you can do at a team level is far more powerful than things you do at a corporate level. Okay, if you can say to the team, and this is another little point on the equity thing. If you as a team are saying, what can we do as a team to be effective in a hybrid working world? And we as a team are thinking about what's equitable in that. We are taking that decision down to a human level with a few people involved with it, a smaller number of people with it, rather than taking it at a global level, at a corporate standpoint, which finds it really hard to build in equity into it because there's so many diverse needs. Whereas that's massively reduced if you get it down to a team level. So there may be a team that has, somebody has to be in the office, on a Monday because it's an input, because the switch has to be flicked on something and you've got to be there. Or they may have to be in the office every day or in the workplace every day because, as I said, maybe they're in a clinical environment or in a maintenance environment or something. But if they're as a team saying, what can we do? And they have all the authority to do that. You can create far more of a sense of fairness out of doing that than if it comes from on high and inevitably things get missed. So, there's a few examples here of things that sit under that category of communication that we're seeing and we're hearing about as working for various organizations. And again, I'm very conscious of your time, and I don't want to take up any more. I mean, I'm happy to carry on for a few more minutes if you want me to, but I am conscious. So I've got a slide for those 7 different categories. I've got a slide looking at stimulus for each of those, and then at the end I've got a slide that sort of brings some of it together. So is that going to be okay for everyone now? I don't know how you're feeling about stuff, Jen. Do you want me to carry on, or is that okay for now?
I'll leave it up to the group how they want to use the time. I know they want to have some time to talk about what you've shared today as well. So anyone have strong opinions?
Shall I jump off? I'll send you the stuff, Jen. And if you guys want to circle back on something more specific, or if there's a particular area you want to delve into a bit more, perhaps I can regroup.
That sounds great. Yeah. I'll be
Okay.
able to share those slides with everyone, and appreciate you
Okay.
sharing all this information.
No problem. Thank you for your time. And again, let me just highlight one thing, which is I think, I really would encourage people to think about this, get into that basic psychological need stuff and work out how you're going to bring those two things together. How do you bring the need for business performance and productivity and those things together with creating an environment that people are attracted to? Because in a world where we've got choices, it feels like we're offering them the ability to have some agency over what it feels like to be in this organization. It is about bringing those two things together, I think. Okay, I'll leave you with that thought. Thanks very much for your time. I'll send the slides over to you, Jen.
Thank you, Matt. I appreciate your time.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Matt.
Cheers.
Bye.
Thanks, Matt.
Right.
Like I mentioned, Patty and I talked briefly via email to think about how we can reflect and debrief on that presentation, but also how you can apply that information to some of the work that you're doing, the facilities that you're working in, the teams that you're on, but also even this steering committee as we think about how we're working and meeting virtually all the time. So I'll open it up for thoughts or comments.
I will just start by saying it's interesting as I look around, even, the 9 boxes for us, and, potentially the organizations. I was thinking of the A's, B's, and C's earlier, who's in their environment. And, if I think back to other meetings, who's always in the work environment, versus who's home or seems to vacillate back and forth. I don't know that it's a symptom, so to speak, or necessarily demonstrates anything, but it is interesting, like, to take that in and, and wonder if it's connected to the way our organizations or roles are set up.
Thank you, Patty. So for our organization, we're 85,000 employees. So we decide, when I said our A is our B, what I mean is that the policy we put in place was that decision would be made locally. Right? And so it was like, so that was the decision, because to have a blanket statement was actually less inclusive for us. because we have so many different types of working environments and different types of roles across our organization. So from that perspective, also I felt the ahas that I had during the presentation were around some of the structures that are in place. My gosh, do I wish we had had this soon after the pandemic. This would have really informed a lot of our thinking around this. I feel at this point we've adapted and we're adopting. So therefore, you know, some of this was affirmation, and others of it were, oh, I wonder if, you know, a curiosity more than an application for me.
I have to drop it for it. I apologize. You know, I agree, and I just want to thank you for bringing him on. I know we were sort of silent and, you know, and I think that was hard for him to come and present, but, you know, sort of what Tim said, you know, I agree. I wish I had it at right after we were coming out of the pandemic. But that being said, you know, it's nice when we have someone external who is able to go from not only different healthcare organizations, from different industries, to present and put some intentionality around things that, you know, sometimes the intentionality came in retrospect. So I think it's nice to be able to hear someone externally who has this type of experience, even if while he was presenting, I was saying, boy, it would have been helpful to have it months ago, because I know where we are, you know, we've gotten some things more right than we have in the past. But with the remote work and the hybrid work, particularly as there are pockets around the organization that are leaning more one way than the other, I don't think we've perfected it yet. And I do think that we're going to need to be able to retain the right people, to be able to change with the times, to be able to, you know, meet the demands of the future. So I just want to thank you for bringing him in. And it was good seeing everyone.
And if anyone has any follow-up questions for Matt or things like that, I can share his contact information, so.
I think because we are healthcare organizations, the challenge is we don't have a what do you call a uniform workforce. And what I mean by that is we have clinical roles and non-clinical roles, right? So I think we are trying to put a policy together, but it needs to be very detailed and very comprehensive, because if we miss some important aspect of a role or a department, I think this can cause a lot of chaos, right? Providers don't have the luxury to be remote, but there are some roles that, you know, are required to be in person, but I think that the people who are in these roles could challenge that. So I think there is a lot of like push and pull going on while we're having discussions with the staff on what is the best way to address that, so that there is quote unquote parity, but there is no real parity, because, you know, a surgeon cannot be working, you know, remotely, at least until we maybe have robotics doing surgery, surgeon's command or something. So I think that's a big challenge.
One of the things that I was gonna add, and it would be interesting for you guys to weigh in, I wonder if it's happening in other places as well, is, you know, when we came out of the pandemic, you know, individuals talked a lot about wanting the flexibility, you know, and we felt work satisfaction would be better, affording them the opportunity to remain hybrid. But I'm going to say, now that we're in June of 2024 and kind of 18 months post major part of the pandemic, I don't want to say, like, to me, I find this is now sort of the basic component, and people are just now have added to the list. You know, the ability to be hybrid as a work enhancement or satisfier has really only lasted this long. I don't know if anybody else is finding that, but when we just, you know, did and completed a engagement survey, and like the things that came back of detractors from the environment, the fact that you can work from home, you know, periods of time or have some flexibility didn't even really rise to the top anymore as a positive.
So I wonder, Patty, is it because this is assumed to be a new norm? So people
That's
are
what I was going to
really
ask
thinking about
too.
it. Yeah, so is that the baseline? Like this is
Yeah.
expected?
I think
You
it's
know,
table
I
stakes
don't know.
for
I'm
people
just,
now.
yeah.
And yeah, that's what I'm experiencing.
So if you take that away from them, this is just a hypothesis, Patty, so forgive me. But if you take that away from them, it would be interesting to see what happens then, because then they may cry foul saying, you know, this is the new world we're living in. You know, are you kidding me? Me coming in the office 5 days a week. So it's just that it's become a part of our DNA that nobody's even bringing that up. It's a thought.
Like the 5-day work week.
Yeah. We a year ago we did the official return to the office. And so I needed this presentation a year ago, and I did in fact build a presentation that had a lot of the same concepts in it. So I was looking at this like, oh man. But it was gratifying, like somebody else said, because I put a lot of the same content in. So it was nice to see it, an expert present it and be like, oh, good, I said that. But some of you guys know, because we've talked about it before, for us executives are in the office 5 days a week, mandatory, no flexibility. And the admin assistants are in the office 5 days a week. And that was just like laid down. And I do flex sometimes a little bit, and I let my assistant follow my schedule. So if I'm traveling for work, then she doesn't come in, because I'm like, there's no reason for you to sit outside my empty office. So if I'm not here, you know what I mean? So like I put B because I kind of make my own rules and nobody comes down and checks. And I'm like, nobody is going to fire me over this, right? But there is not technically flexibility in that. But for the rest of the workforce, it's 2 to 3 days hybrid. But putting that in, people were really unhappy about it. And a year later, if there are meetings that people have to come in for 3 days a week in person, they're cranky about that third day. It is like there's grumbling on the third day. Everybody's pretty okay with the 2 days, but the third day it's like, well, so yeah, and heaven forbid there's a week where there are actually 4 days that you have to come in for things. That is really like, gosh, what are you going to do for me? Did you order pizza, or am I going to get some premium pay for this?
At least that's the week you travel.
Right. But I'm looking out at a sea of empty workstations. So I don't actually mind being in the office. It is also silly because like, here I am to work with no one.
Alice, I totally get it, because today in the office is myself and my AVP, who just coincidentally is here on Monday. I'm here 5 days a week. But my 20 team members are all sitting from home.
Yeah.
I think the hardest part for me is a new person joining the team it takes so long for them to kind of get engaged and feel like they're part of the team, because we are doing the hybrid. So we are doing 2+3, 2 days in office, 3 days remote. Although I go in a lot more frequently, but the team doesn't. And it takes a lot longer time for the person to feel like they're part or they belong to, because, you know, half the time you don't see your teammates. I mean, you're obviously doing remote meetings, but the connection is not there. It takes a lot longer. That's when I said employee engagement, when Matt asked, so that is, I think, that is a challenge. And you have no idea. I mean, of course, you have the conversations, the performance conversations, the one-on-ones. I personally think I have a less of a read on my people than I used to when they used to come in terms of where they stand, how they feel. I don't know if this masks it, or maybe I need to do a better job of, you know, putting my X-ray vision on and dissect, you know. It's a lot harder to see what's going on in their heads.
I guess one thing is for sure, we haven't necessarily gotten it right, despite, I guess, the amount of time we've been working on it, right? Or working at it.
For sure.
And I don't deny that probably Deloitte is doing a good job in, you know, asking its team members for input or trying to work from a different angle to make things better. You know, my guess is they have theoretically always had to have some form of, when I use the word remote work, meaning like if you're working with a client in Texas, but your home office is in New York, you had some version of remote. You may have been working from an office building, but you weren't always physically on site at your client. I don't know whether healthcare, being such a high touch environment, you know, is struggling more or less than other industries with this, you know, opportunity. And as you guys brought up before, you know, the clinical staff can't be remote. I know for us, it's still a bone of contention,
Yeah,
you know, from team
Yeah.
members. Sorry, Alice,
Yeah.
what were you gonna say?
I was just agreeing. That's the same thing with us.
And, you know, to both of your points, there are some roles that are gray where they can provide remote. So that's where it becomes challenging, saying, oh, this L&D team is remote 3 days a week. How come I cannot do that in my role? So that's where we're struggling, where there are some roles that require kind of more of a in-person attendance. But I think these are the people in these roles that are challenging, saying, hey, we can provide remote support. And these are on the clinical, they're administrative, but they're on clinical side of things. So that's where it kind of gets a little challenging. And Patty, to your point, I used to work for PwC in my past life, and I was traveling Monday through Thursday. So I don't know, you cannot even compare them with us because you're remote. I mean, I was remote because I was at clients mostly, or the one day I wasn't traveling, I was working from home. So I think that this was part of their DNA from the very beginning. So I don't know if they had to do anything drastic like we had to.
And Manish, I would actually argue that it got better for consultants because you all of a sudden started using Zoom and the interaction with like the web camera use, when it was just, I remember conference calls, you know, it was all, you couldn't read people's body language. I think it got actually
Yeah.
easier to facilitate business for a lot of like the Deloittes and consulting companies.
Yeah, good point, Megan. And I used to travel in the dark ages, so that computer was just invented. I'm just kidding, but it was more that there was no virtual. We
Right.
barely had virtual meetings. You had to be like physically land wherever your client was.
Mhm.
This was not a norm, not even a conference call. So
Yeah.
this is Megan, you were not even born then, so
Shush.
no.
On the plus
I
side,
look younger than I am,
Yeah.
okay?
back then when we flew for business, you couldn't work on the plane, and that was fun. It'd be like, I'm gonna be in the air for 4 hours. I'm sorry,
Oops,
I'm unreachable.
sorry. I get to read my book. Oh,
Now, yeah. Yeah, I worked in consulting before this too, and it was the same. It was global, so you were always working remotely, even if everyone was, but there was like what he talked about with, is there that underlying question of people might not really be working, and in consulting, that's never a question because everyone's always working all the time, and it. Like there's never a question in consulting that somebody might not be working because you're all always working, like always. So it eliminates that, where here there is sort of that lurking suspicion of like, might somebody just be sitting around, or like maybe not even sitting at a desk? Might they just be at Target? I don't know.
That's true. And most of us not being helicopter managers,
Yeah,
I'm not tracking my people every minute or second of the day. I mean, I'm trusting and the job is getting done. That's how I
yeah.
know that they're doing what they're supposed to, but it's not like I have no idea.
And the non-clinical work in healthcare doesn't have the same sort of billable results that consulting does to be able to easily measure it.
That's true. That is a very good point. Yeah, that's an excellent point. Because here, at least it's trackable, right? Because you know what you build for. And if you're sitting at Target, then,
It'd be evident really fast.
it'll be very evident.
Oh,
It's interesting, Alice, because just to your point, I've heard a lot recently on the, I'm going to say, multitasking piece. And not multitasking meaning like I'm writing an email and I'm on a call. You know what I mean? Like not that kind of multitasking, but people taking their calls in Target, right? Or
Mhm.
standing at the bus stop.
Mhm.
And so sometimes the frustration that I hear from some of our leadership is that kind of mix of personal and professional time, but there's no clear break. It's not like, I work from 8 to 10 and then I take a break from 10 to 11 and then I'm back from 11 to 5. But this like very gray zone. I actually had a leader who was working with a team member of mine. She has a young kid who's, I'm guessing he's about 4. She works from home. He's there. He's not in like daycare or school 5 days a week. And he can come and interrupt her at any time, right? Like, so whether it's he has to go to the potty or he needs a snack or whatever the case is. And a leader, saying to me afterwards that, this is work time, and competing with like a 3.5, 4-year-old kid for like the time. And so I don't know, whether we started here and we've moved this way.
Yeah.
Or, kind of what that is. But it's interesting to me how the sort of gamut or the feedback that I get is not only about there was a project and, either was it done or wasn't it done, but
Mhm.
the judgment on those in-between pieces.
We had a team that when we brought people back, there was an exception process. And there was one team where every person on the team submitted an exception. And all of their exceptions basically ended up showing that none of them could possibly have been working full-time. And it was stuff that, like, in the first year of the pandemic probably would have been fine because there was no other plan. It was like all their support services were gone. There was no other way to navigate it. But at this point, 4 years later, it had just become a way of life. And so we had to have really hard conversations of saying, we get it, like schools were closed, elder care was not available, like there were no resources. But now you really should be working full-time because you're being paid full-time and we were kind of pausing on work. You didn't have full-time work responsibilities either, but now we're back to running at 100% at work and all of those resources are available. So if you can't come to work on your days because you're a full-time caregiver for a small person and an ailing adult and all of these other things, you probably aren't actually capable of working full-time. And maybe you're not in a position to do this job anymore. And it ended up being really difficult. Or we had people who were like, oh, I've actually moved to Canada, or, oh, I actually have a part-time job as a realtor and I really couldn't possibly also come in. And so we had this team that all of them had some reason that they couldn't come in. So probably not getting our money's worth out of this team. And so what, of course, that told us is we had a problem with the manager of that team who had created such a safe environment that the entire team was able to get away with not really doing their work or being held accountable for it for a pretty long time.
Wow.
But all stuff that would have been completely okay for the first 9 months, where we really were just like, most of this stuff is on pause while we're getting our bearings, and then just never ramped back out of it. But it does sort of say, Patty, like, what's the line of what's okay? Because we want to be more okay with you're a whole person and you have a life and there is a work-life integration that we want to be supportive of, but to what extent is it okay? And do we still have a professional presence? And to what extent is it allowing you to still fully and appropriately complete your work responsibilities?
I was just gonna ask Alice, and well, all three of you, if there are any generational differences, if you're noticing, is it just specific teams, or are you seeing it in the younger generation that's coming in that really wants to only work remote, and kind of some pushback from older generation that's saying we want to be in person to do these things? Is there any kind of strong opinion throughout any of those generations?
I think from what I've read, Jen, I haven't experienced it, but I don't have any Gen Zs on my team. But I have a daughter who's Gen Z, and I think she has this phrase that you guys, and I hope I get it right, you guys live to work. I work
No.
to live. I
That's the
hope I got
opposite.
it right. Yeah. Yeah, we have a life. You guys don't. And I think, I don't know if that's what I've read for Gen Z. I don't know how prevalent it is or how true it is because I don't have Gen Z team members. I do have somebody at home. But
Mhm.
I think there,
Yeah. I would say our baby boomers, and our executive baby boomers have been the most like, I want to see you. Where are you? If I don't see you, you're not working.
Mhm.
And that I feel pretty confident saying that. Our CEO being the boomerist. It was our CEO who said we're doing the return to work, even though most of our executives were like, dude, we're not on board with this. Your executive team do not want to be here 5 days a week. We are highly productive not being here 5 days a week. Don't make us sit in our offices 5 days a week. Let us decide what works for us and our teams. And he was like, nope, we're doing it. Like, this is the hill I will die on.
Interesting.
So, yeah, so like I executed it, but it was not my baby. But, I like in our organization, I'd say most Xers have just been like, fine, buckle up, we're gonna do it. That's me. Like, yeah, all right, this is what we can
Yeah.
expect from the man. It's,
Mhm.
they've screwed us before, they'll screw us again. And it's actually my millennial staff who's been the most outraged and like, let's fight this. And
There you go. The hands go up.
and my Z's are grumbly, but they're doing it. But they're
Because they know no it's like their entree to the
they're
professional
like,
world.
I don't like this, but I'll do it until I find something better. And I'll just like, I am keeping score, but I am
Yeah.
counting. Like, just
Mhm.
know this will all be reckoned, and I'm counting this in my reckoning.
Mhm.
It just, yeah, sounds like my
But like the
daughter.
fight is coming from millennials.
Yeah, because they are entrenched in the workforce, they know the ins and outs of what works.
And they're
what-
juggling,
Yeah.
juggling families, and like they're in the
Yeah.
they're in the most thick of juggling things.
And they're on the cusp of those power positions,
Yeah,
right? They're
they
on the
are.
cusp of
They're
like
on the
senior
cusp,
leadership.
right.
So they are like, I feel like they finally feel, or at least we finally feel like we're in a position of influence where maybe if we say something, we can make a difference, but maybe not.
Yeah.
Don't know yet. Test the waters.
Yeah, Jen, I was gonna say, sometimes, similar to Alice, I mean, we find the same breakdown, but honestly, sometimes I'm not sure if it's the generation or if it's where where the majority of them coincidentally fall in the workspace.
Mhm.
Meaning, like, it tends to be our boomers and our Xers who are in executive or more senior roles. And so coincidentally, is that because they're at the executive level and expect something different from themselves versus just it being a generational thing? Or is it an age thing? Like, I know for myself, like, I've got kids who are 24 and 20, and they don't need me to like really be around. They're in the workspace too, in that Z space. And so, unlike the mom I was saying before, who's got a 3.5-year-old at home, I'm not struggling with the same things. Is it different because Gen Z, is at a different part of their career trajectory? Maybe part of it is generational. Like, I don't want to like work to the bone, and so employer, I'm expecting something different of you. Is it because, like, I know my 24-year-old, like, he's not married, he doesn't have kids, so this is his time to not maybe care as much, but he is in the workspace, and he's got me as a mom who, was trying to employ work ethics along the way, and so he's committed, but not maybe overly committed, because this is his time to travel. This is his time to explore. like, so sometimes in my head, I go, is that a generational thing? Is it where they are physically in the work environment? Is it all of it somehow mushed and coupled together? I don't know.
I think it's fairly complex. There is no like, and the other thing is things that they got used to got sort of taken away, which is the hardest part, right? You got used to certain lifestyle, you're taking care of your kids, you're taking care of your parents because you're home all the time. And you're like, this is going to continue in perpetuity. And obviously nothing continues in perpetuity. And this is what is hard to kind of come to grips with is I have to give up taking care of my child. I'll have to pay for it. I have an elderly, parent, and I need to make arrangements. And this is what is probably making it difficult. And
Well, thank you. We only have a minute left of our half-hour discussion time, but a few items that I just wanted to let you know that will be coming to your inbox. An update on the Resource Hub project that we've been working on kind of behind the scenes, looking at the categories of content that you want to see in there. So we'll have a survey out for that. The user agreement as well, thinking through what we need to include in some sort of user agreement for that and a draft of that. And then linked in the agenda is our Lens work plan, so you can see what's coming down the pipeline for the other councils. And then one ask that we have is for our upcoming trial membership. We're hoping to launch that in July to be able to have some folks join us, hopefully for the next few months for trial members. We had Cincinnati Children's last year, I believe, Megan, right? Cincinnati Children's joined us last year as full members for this year. So if you have any organizations that you think are doing great work in these same fields or would be great addition to the Lens community, would love to have contacts for those folks or just the organization, and I can dive a bit deeper to find the right folks within the organization. But I would appreciate any insight that you all have as you're the boots on the ground. So that's it for me. We'll meet next in August on the 14th, and looking forward to seeing you all virtually then.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.